You're watching The Legal Breakdown. Glenn, this is a question I've gotten more than any other question as of late, so I wanted to discuss it with you. As we head toward Trump's second swearing in, the question I'm getting is, could whoever swears in Trump be in violation of their oath of office by violating the Constitution, in that they will be swearing in somebody who is an avowed insurrectionist, somebody who is an adjudicated insurrectionist? And the Constitution clearly states that nobody who has engaged in insurrection or given aid or comfort to those who've engaged in insurrection can take the oath of office. And so, again, none of this is to say here that Trump won't be sworn in. So I want to caveat that, because he will be. But just engaging in this thought experiment here, because this is a question I'm getting more than any other, could somebody who does swear him in be in violation of their oath of office by virtue of doing this?
You know, Brian, it's a great question, even if it's only a thought experiment or an academic exercise, because it's an academic exercise that is based in the plain language of the Constitution, the text of Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. So let's walk through it and then answer your question. First of all, the 14th Amendment, Section 3 says, anybody who takes an oath of allegiance to the Constitution, support and defend the Constitution of the United States, Donald Trump did as president, who thereafter engages in insurrection or gives aid and comfort to an insurrection or insurrectionists, is disqualified, may not hold office, federal, state, or local, period, unless Congress votes. And the House would have to vote to remove the disability, to restore someone's eligibility to hold office by a two-thirds vote, and the Senate would have to vote to remove the disability by a two-thirds vote. So this thought experiment leads to the logical conclusion, Brian, and I'm basing it on the express language of the 14th Amendment, that if somebody engaged in insurrection and after taking an oath to support and defend the Constitution, and Congress has not voted to remove that disqualification, that person cannot be sworn in. The Constitution says that. That's not me saying it. So it would naturally flow from that the person swearing in the insurrectionist is engaged in at least an act contrary to the Constitution. I would say it would also be unethical. It would also be immoral. It would be undemocratic, because you would be violating the Constitution and installing somebody into a federal office, indeed the highest office in the land, somebody who's not eligible under the very language of the Constitution that governs who is and is not eligible. I would say, Brian, it's not unlike if somebody was 34 years old. The Constitution says in order to hold the office of the presidency, you have to be 35. Right. So a 34-year-old can't be sworn in. Somebody who's not a natural-born citizen can't be sworn in. Why? Because the Constitution says so. But, you know, to play out this academic exercise, this thought experiment, it would seem that nobody should be constitutionally permitted to swear in an insurrectionist.
Well, then that obviously raises the question that, yes, Trump is an adjudicated insurrectionist. We heard so from a judge in California. We heard so from a trial judge in Colorado, from the Colorado Supreme Court. So that was all undermined by what the U.S. Supreme Court says. So is he still an adjudicated insurrectionist if the Supreme Court had the final say, and theirs is the decision that actually establishes precedent, that actually holds weight?
Yes, he is still an adjudicated insurrectionist, but that doesn't fully answer the question, because we have to sort of tease out exactly what the Supreme Court said when they shot down the state of Colorado's attempt to keep Donald Trump off of a presidential primary ballot in Colorado. The reason I say he remains an adjudicated insurrectionist is because there was a trial in Colorado at which Donald Trump was represented, and the trial court judge, after hearing from the witnesses, hearing the evidence, taking into account the arguments of both parties, Trump and the petitioner in the case, the trial court judge ruled Donald Trump engaged in insurrection. That was appealed all the way up to the Colorado Supreme Court, and the Colorado Supreme Court affirmed that ruling. Donald Trump is an insurrectionist. Then Donald Trump ran to the United States Supreme Court, where he had at least, 6 receptive radical right-wing justices. And here's what they ultimately ruled, Brian. Remember, the question that they had to resolve, they had to decide was, can the state of Colorado keep Donald Trump's name off a presidential primary ballot in their state? And they ruled no. Colorado can't keep his name off the ballot. Brian, believe it or not, I agree with the Supreme Court. Why? Because that question is governed by the text of the 14th Amendment. The 14th Amendment doesn't say if you take an oath to support and defend the Constitution and you thereafter engage in insurrection, you can't have your name on a primary ballot in a state contest. It doesn't say that. What it says is that you're disqualified from holding office unless Congress removes the disability. That, to me, is still an open question because that issue, precise issue, has not presented itself to any court, but it may present itself to a court when, come January 6th, they are certifying the election in Congress. It may come to a court's attention come January 19th or 20th when Donald Trump is on the verge of taking the oath of office, holding an office from which he's disqualified according to an application of the 14th Amendment. Now, Brian, let me tell our viewers, I'm not saying any of this is going to play out and actually stop Donald Trump from being certified as the election's winner or sworn in on January 20th. But anybody who cares about the plain text of the Constitution should have serious reservations about an adjudicated insurrectionist serving as president of the United States. And let me just finish the thought by saying, you asked the question, is he still an adjudicated insurrectionist? And I said, yes, he is, because a court adjudicated him an insurrectionist. A state Supreme Court affirmed that ruling. And in the U.S. Supreme Court case, Brian, they never undercut or negated or even quibbled with the fact that Donald Trump engaged in insurrection. They sidestepped the issue entirely by simply saying, doesn't mean Colorado can keep him off the primary ballot.
And so let's finish off with this. There is obviously a difference, and we've spoken about this a lot, a difference between what is right and what is practical. And I think in this instance, can you parse out the two? Because clearly, after the last few minutes of you making this discussion, there is a case to prevent Trump's ascent into the presidency. And I know a lot of people out there who are watching are thinking the same thing, that there's no way he should be able to take the oath of office. But now can you explain the other side of the coin, which is, you know, the practical matter of all this and what we're able to do with what limited political capital we have and with what limited appetite to push back that so many in the legal system, in the political system have?
Yeah, I generally like to stop my analysis with what's right, not what's practical, because what's practical is in the eye of the beholder, right? Some people say, well, practically speaking, because Donald Trump was voted in by a very slim majority of the American voters, nothing you could do to stop him. Well, there's nothing you can do to stop him if we decide to completely throw out the Constitution's disqualification of an insurrectionist. So if I had to predict the practicalities of this, let's assume that there was an objection raised either on January 6th or January 20th to Donald Trump being an adjudicated insurrectionist, Congress not having taken the requisite vote to try to remove the disqualification by a 2/3 vote in both houses, and Donald Trump filed suit and ran right up to the Supreme Court. Practically speaking, I'll bet the Supreme Court would say, yeah, but you know, he was only adjudicated an insurrectionist by one state, and we just like we couldn't let one state perhaps be outcome determinative in the election by keeping his name off the primary ballot in that state, we're not going to let that one state's adjudication of Donald Trump as an insurrectionist win the day for the other 49 states. So practically speaking, we're going to go ahead and let an adjudicated insurrectionist serve in office again, contrary to Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. Because, you know, It's only the practical thing to do.
Right. Well, this clearly makes for a really interesting thought experiment. I think you and I can both agree that if this was a country that was more focused on protecting, upholding, and defending the Constitution, this wouldn't be the situation that we're in right now. But unfortunately, that doesn't seem to be the country that we're living in. And there doesn't seem to be the political capital and political courage to do what's right here. But that doesn't mean that you and I and the folks watching right now don't still fight for justice in the best way that we can on a daily basis. So with that said, for everybody who's watching, if you want to follow along with analysis like this and for updates on the latest legal news, please make sure to subscribe. The links to both of our channels are right here on this screen. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
And I'm Glenn Kirshner.
You're watching The Legal Breakdown.